family told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her two brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside, they heard noises, as if something was moving things around. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary, because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew they should take action. They took out a rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed it at the dark figure. The figure turned around and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the lights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran towards the truck. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking its head out to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house over the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed it over the gun and bullet and placed it into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside, and my uncles and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure. The truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that every time the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck as it neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet. He got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew her, and to leave his family alone. A few days passed and there was news that a woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who a Skinwalker is, say their name, and it will kill them. My cousin lived in the eastern agency of the Navajo Nation in a community known as Crown Point. She was still living with her parents at this time and was a good girl, and was very popular and played on the basketball team. When she told us this story, it was very out of the ordinary, and the events that followed would also deepen my beliefs in the traditional Navajo way and of the taboos associated with the Navajo culture. My cousin was coming home from basketball practice, which ran past sunset. It was during the colder months, so it was dark by the time she pulled into her neighborhood. She pulled into a small housing community that she lived in. It was far from a fenced community, but there were streetlights and the neighbors weren't too far from each other. As she neared her home, she saw a group of dogs. This wasn't unlikely, as there are random packs of stray dogs that roam rural communities. These dogs don't belong to anyone, and they get food wherever they can find it. As she got closer, she noticed something was off about the dogs. There were 4 dogs, and they were sitting in a circle, all facing each other. This didn't really faze her until she spoke about the event later. Because this was a housing community, my cousin couldn't barrel down the road, so she slowly drove past the group of dogs and kept going on her own way. As she continued to drive, she noticed in her peripheral vision that something was running alongside her car. She turned her head to see that brown dog from the group was trotting alongside her car. She didn't mind much until she hit a strategically placed speed bump. The impact of the bump made her entire car wobble. She looked over at the dog again, still casually keeping pace with the car. She tried to ignore the dog and tried speeding up, keeping in mind where the speed bumps were placed. The dog continued to keep pace. My cousin had to eventually stop at a stop sign. She began to feel immensely uncomfortable and tried to keep her eyes forward, but curiosity got the best of her. She looked over at the dog. It was facing forward. She continued to stare, and that's when the dog turned its head. Instead of the face of a dog, there was a flat face of a man covered in hair, smiling from ear to ear. Fear shot through her body and my cousin pushed the pedal to the floor, not daring to look back in her rearview mirror. She reached her house and barely pulled herself in the door, weak from fear. My aunt came to her and my cousin began to sob. She told my aunt everything, and they scheduled a meeting with a medicine man the next day. That night, my cousin was trying to get some rest. She was tossing and turning and felt very ill. She could hear people outside laughing and talking in Navajo, but she didn't think too much of it because she lived in a community near plenty of neighbors. At the medicine man, she told my cousin that she was very fortunate. The Skinwalker wasn't meant for her. She just happened to spot it while it was out bringing another person misfortune. He also told her that the laughing and talking that she heard in the night was the Skinwalker talking to its friends, letting them know that someone had saw him and that he had scared her. The medicine man told my cousin if the Skinwalker had been for her, and she had seen him like that, it very well could have killed her. After that encounter, my cousin suffered from many ailments and had to stop playing basketball for a while. She had many ceremonies and eventually got back on her feet. My mom told us this story on many of the nights when the electricity would go out. When I asked my cousin about it, she confirms it's true, but doesn't like talking about it much. Out on the Navajo reservation, we don't have the city come and collect our trash, so we burn our trash in these huge burning barrels. Not very eco-friendly, I know, but it's what we got. If you don't like the trash properly, the fire will go out and the trash will just sit in the barrel. It is important because we are told to dispose of our personal hygiene items correctly. If you removed all of your hair from your brush, make sure the trash burned. If it was that time of month, make sure the trash burned. If you changed a baby's diaper, make sure the trash burned. They tell us these things because skinwalkers have been known to dig through the trash in order to find things that they can get to use against us. They use the things that we're briefly connected to and bring misfortune on to us using these things. Some of my family members take part in the sport of rodeo. So, to practice, they have to rope a dummy and take turns roping it. My two male cousins were enjoying themselves outside and taking turns swinging the rope at the fake calf. The elders were always adamant that we shouldn't stay out past sundown, especially out on the res, where it's pitch black and there's no one around for miles. But my cousins weren't the superstitious type, and they were under a streetlight. My cousins were joking around laughing, having a great time. That changes when my eldest cousin looks over to the burn barrel. A dark figure is bent over, rummaging through the garbage that failed to burn. My cousin devised a plan that they were going to grab weapons, sticks, and rocks, and go chase whatever it was. They move strategically, so that they are able to flank the figure. They run full speed and begin yelling and swinging their sticks and throwing their rocks. My cousin said that they kept up with it for the most part. That was until the figure ran underneath the streetlight. What my cousins thought was a person was actually a goat. Why would they think it was a person? Because the goat was running on its hind legs. They stopped running and fear ran down their backs, and the figure ran off into the dark. Feeling nervous and not entirely accepting what they just saw, they began roping the dummy again. There was an awkward silence amongst the boys now. They saw something so unnatural, but talking about it now would just make it seem real. Were they crazy? Did they really see a skinwalker? The boys roped the dummy in silence until one of them looked over to the tree. There was a head peeking out at them. If they didn't pay attention to it, whatever it was would just poke its head out from behind the tree and stare. When they would look in the direction of the tree, it would quickly move back out of sight. This was the final straw, and my cousins ran back into the house. They told their parents and my uncle came out to look. It was still there, poking its head out and going behind the tree. My uncle loaded his gun and started to walk towards the tree. He aimed and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun jammed. Whatever it was began to run, but it was so fast, like a blur, as my cousin describes it. When it left, my uncle gave the boys a thorough lecture about staying out late. The next day, my cousins told my uncle about whatever it was had been digging through the trash barrel. They went out to investigate and saw the creature had pulled out a lot of things out of the barrel. What was odd was the tracks. Goat prints were all around the area. They followed a set of tracks that were found around a baby diaper, several feet away from the barrel. Whatever they saw that night had very malevolent intentions. My cousins said that although the sight was ungodly, they know what they saw and stand by their claims. So I grew up in Utah and lived about an hour away from the Skinwalker Ranch. And going there as a high schooler was just a thing to do, just to see if it was true or not, and to see if you actually got scared. But here's my story. First time me and a couple friends went out there, we got pretty far in. We got out of the car and started walking around. Mind you, this was around 1:30 in the morning. We found an old beat-up wood shed that looked like it was falling apart, but you could see through the holes of it. There were hooks, the kind you use for hanging up deer or cows. They looked mostly rusted, but the walls and everything around looked like it was splattered with old dried blood. It was everywhere, but of course it was dried. But the worst part started happening when we walked away from the shed. Since we had a couple of flashlights, we looked around when we were walking. We would see pairs of eyes around us. At first, it was just the shiny reflective look, like when you shine the light at a dog or a cat, so we thought it was just a couple dogs or coyotes. We continued on a bit more until we started seeing more eyes. But they were red, like bright red, even if you had the light in their direction, and they were a lot higher than a normal level would be for an animal. That's when we decided to turn back. What started to get me was one pair was always in front of us as we were walking to the car, staring at us like it was walking backwards with us. We never caught up to it, but it never left. Same with all of the others that kept circling us as we made our way back to the car. When we got to the car, we just wanted to get out of there. We got in and it wouldn't start. Nothing would turn on at first, no matter how hard he turned the key. He tried it twice, then only the radio kicked on. We started panicking because the eyes got closer. Then bam! Something hit the side of the car really hard, but we couldn't see what it was. It hit the car on the right side 3 times. My buddy got the car started finally after like 5 minutes of freaking out, trying to get it going. I'm in the passenger seat about to crap myself, and my other friend was in the back seat, freaked out but speechless, with the most scared look I've ever seen. But when he got the car started, there was no delay in leaving. He put the car in gear and spun those tires and got us out of there. Once you get out of the gate onto the main road that goes by, you're pretty much off the ranch. We thought we were away from everything since we were on an actual road, but my buddy didn't slow down. We were going 85 miles an hour down that road, going right home. I looked, and to the left, about 15 feet off, was a pair of red eyes. It was keeping up to us, and that's when it charged at us. I kind of got a glimpse before it smashed into the side of the car. It was definitely big, like 4 feet from its legs to its headish looking thing. Kind of hard to explain when I didn't get a great look at it. We eventually lost it, and when we got home, we went straight to bed. But in the morning, we looked at his car. One huge dent on the left rear fender and another dent on the right door on the passenger side, about the size of my head. We were so lucky to get out of there. So every summer I go to a lake in upstate New York, near the Canadian border. My family has a house that is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It's a 30 to 45 minute drive to the nearest convenience store. We have 3 neighbors on our side of the lake, but there aren't any kids and it's mostly all retired or vacationing elderly people. They don't stay up past 10 and it's perfectly quiet when the sun goes down. Here's my story. I have zero explanation for this, and the most reasonable thing to assume is a skinwalker. Around 11:30 p.m., maybe midnight, my cousin and I go down to the dock on the water. We have to walk through a short path in the woods to get there, and the thick trees border directly on the shore. While looking out at the stars and the water, we hear a quiet, raspy rumbling. That's the best way I can explain it. Out of the forest, pretty far away. We didn't really know what it was and wasn't bothered by it. About 2 minutes later, we hear the same voice say both of our names. This time it was closer to our property. From our dock, we can see along the shoreline, and we're near a corner so we could see pretty well along the coast to our left. We were looking with a flashlight in the trees and saw nothing. Maybe someone was out kayaking at night and said something to their friend, and we just heard them wrong. Sounds travel across water very easily, so it couldn't have been someone from their house. Although our neighbors are about 1/3 of a mile away, our uncle couldn't have been pulling a prank on us because of how far away it was. And there wasn't any light. 5 minutes pass and we've calmed down. While we were sitting there in silence, thinking about what just happened, we hear footsteps. Loud, leaf-crunching footsteps about 10 feet to the left of our dock, right behind the tree line, so we couldn't see anything. These footsteps were either from a human, bear, or deer. My cousin whispered to me that we need to get inside, but I told him that it might be a bear, and I didn't want to get chased while running back inside. So we were sitting on the dock holding our breath as the footsteps continued, then stopped for a bit. All of a sudden we hear the same voice that said our names. Hello. I have never been more scared in my life. The voice was speaking English, but it wasn't human. It had an almost robotic growl under the word. Both of us flipped out at this point and sprinted inside, not even trying to glance at what was in the trees. My uncle was sitting on the couch with our dog. We spent the next 30 minutes checking the whole property in the nearby forest and didn't see anything. What the hell could it have been? This happened a little more than a week ago, and the scariest part I wondered was, how did that thing know our names? And why was it on our property? Yesterday I was reminded of the Skinwalker from some videos on YouTube. It fits perfectly with the story, but they aren't known for being in New York. I wish I saw what it was, to see if it had a human or a deer form, but the trees were so thick and it was so dark we couldn't see anything behind the trees. Anyways, talking about them is apparently bad luck, and encountering what I experienced ever again will be too soon. So this took place in my dad's, then girlfriend's house, during broad daylight in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, just off of River Road. Behind the house there was a forest, but it's a bit dense to play in, so we'd usually just follow the deer trail a bit into the woods, till there was a clearing where there was a barbed wire fence that cut right through the middle of it. We'd hop the fence and go through the woods on the other side. On the other side was a planted pine forest that ran along the fence for the airport there. It was pretty wide open back there, so you could see straight down the rows to the other side. My brother and I were back there with the girlfriend's nephew, just tromping around. You know, just some kids being rowdy and noisy. Well, at the very end of the rows of trees is a road, which is actually a fire trail, but we called it the road. And on the other side of the road was a more dense forest. We reached the road and stopped and talked like we usually did, to look at a deer track or a squirrel or something, when this skunky bear-like smell came up. My brother and I both felt an urge to look up the road towards the airport fence. What I saw was what looked like the head of a huge black wolf, but it didn't look right. His ears weren't in the right spots and looked droopy, and his eyes looked off. They were too big and bright for his face. His front legs were long and skinny, but he was standing right like a wolf, just way too big. My brother and I looked at each other, and here's where I'm going to mention that my brother and I are very close, so we would usually give each other a look and know what it meant. Here we looked at each other and instantly started to briskly walk back. The girlfriend's nephew just started to walk with us. He asked what was up and we just shushed him. We were being as quiet as we could, but we knew it would hear every step and movement of us. Once we hopped the barbed wire fence, we ran as fast as we could to get to the house. Once we got to the back entrance, we looked back, and there it was, looking at us through the brush. We didn't hear it move behind us or anything. We pointed it out to the nephew, and we all watched it flop back into the woods. Now my brother and I have been raised on 80 acres of land just south of Bobbing. We've seen wolf, bear, moose, mountain lions, coyote, pretty much everything else. We both have never seen a wolf that big and lanky in our lives. I feel like it's important to note that at least I didn't feel any dread or anything like that. It was more a primal fear, like I knew we all had to get away from it, but not show we were afraid. I felt like if we ran from it, it would have taken us down. My brother and I told my dad, and he didn't seem too interested, but he was that way about everything growing up. The next morning, my brother and I went back out to look for tracks, so we could see where and how it stalked us. We saw huge dog-like tracks, and about 6 feet up in a tree, following its route back, we found thick black fur. We noped out of there fast and didn't go back without protection. About a few weeks later, I'm home alone. All the doors are locked, and only the back windows on the house are open. I suddenly notice the dogs are acting weird. Then I hear clear as day, by the back door, my dad's girlfriend's voice call for her dog. I froze but looked up at my bedroom doorway into the small hall. The dog got up and went to the kitchen where the back door was. She was quiet for a moment, then I heard her claws skid across the floor and she ran back to my room. I closed the door and locked it fast and closed my window. The only reason it freaked me out was because I didn't hear the garage door open, or the side door open, just the voice. I blessed my room and made sure nothing was allowed in it or around it. The next time my brother visited, he slept in the living room. Now the living room was huge, and you could see out to the front deck. As my brother was sleeping, he heard what he described as an old woman screaming on the deck. He woke up panicking and said he turned on the porch light, and there was a big black crow sitting on the deck banister. After that, he only slept in my room, never out in the open. I'd also like to note that neither of us knew what a skinwalker was at the time, Being that we were 11 and 13 years old and lived in the north, we just assumed that it was a goofy wolf that smelled bad. For context, I live in the Midwest in a suburban area. My boyfriend lives about 30 to 60 minutes away from me, depending on if I use either the interstate highway or the city roads. That being said, I usually take the interstate, then take the highway partway home, since the highway is only about a mile or so away from his neighborhood, and I take it all the way to the interstate. There is also another road I can take, a paved country road with one lane on each side of the road, with no streetlights. It eventually meets up with a few main streets, which are numbered roads, and it will take you back towards the highway and city. I'm sorry for all the background about the roads, but I feel it's important. And I feel like my choice was a definite sign that the butterfly effect is always in works. Onto the story. Earlier today, I went to pick up my boyfriend and we basically hung out and binge watched a TV show I recently got him in. Around 11 p.m., he says he probably should go home since he works in the morning. I agree and drive him home using the interstate with no problems. We kiss goodbye and then I am on my way out of the neighborhood and towards the street that takes me to the main roads. If I turn right, it's a straight shot to the highway. If I turn left, I could take it down to the country road for a bit of a late night drive. I decide to take the latter. I turn left, then turn right at the stoplight and begin to drive through the dark country night. So I had my windows rolled down and my music up, just letting the breeze come in. It was pretty windy, so my car was swerving a little, and you couldn't see the stars or anything because the clouds were taking over the sky, building up a storm. I thought about switching on my high beams to see better, but the road was really curvy and had lots of hills, and I was afraid of accidentally blinding someone coming from the opposite direction. What happened next makes me glad I didn't turn them on. On the left side there was a small patch of woods with overgrowth. To my right were wide open fields, and in front of me was a hill. Toward the crest of the hill I saw something beginning to cross the road, something large and dark, with what looked like antlers on its head. I thought maybe at first it was a deer or even an elk and I slowed down, but when I got closer, I realized something was wrong. One of the things that were wrong was it was moving very slow, like it was hurt or something, and it didn't even glance at me. It just kept moving toward the patch of trees on my left, which I thought seemed weird. I felt like it should have at least acknowledged the sound of my vehicle. The second thing was, this animal that I presumed was a deer or an elk, couldn't have been. It was at least the size of a moose, but that couldn't be right, because where I am from, there are no moose. We had deer and maybe some elk, but no moose. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I watched this moose thing make its way across the road, and then it stopped, and it looked right at me. It twisted its head so fast to look at me I almost screamed. Its face was hideous. It looked rotten somehow, like it was withering away, and its eyes were so dark. I was so scared, it didn't have any eyes. There was something dripping from where the mouth was, and I could see sharp teeth poking from its lips as they pulled back into a sneer. I thought about reversing my car and hightailing it out of there, but I was frozen. You know how when adrenaline kicks, they say you either enter fight or flight mode? Well, they don't tell you that there's a third option, and that's to freeze, which is exactly what I did. I just stayed in place, my hands still on the wheel, foot still digging into the brakes. I don't know how long I sat there staring at this thing, with the thing staring back at me, but when it started towards my car, I honestly thought that was going to be the end of me. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, could barely even breathe. All I could do was hope and pray that I wouldn't be ended by some freakish moose-looking monster. And then a pair of lights began to rise over the hill toward us, and as the other vehicle's high beams shined on the thing in the road, it let out a curdling scream that didn't sound entirely human. It was animalistic and sort of raspy. It's hard to explain. But I watched as that thing got on its hind legs and lurched itself across the road into the thicket of the trees and bushes, narrowly missing the other person. I knew this thing would probably come back if I stayed where I was, so before I could give it the chance, I slammed on my gas pedal and gunned it out of there, going well over the posted speed limit. I just wanted to get as far away from it as possible. Every dark curve or patch of trees or field made me feel so paranoid that I could see the creature again, and all I wanted to do was go home and never, for the life of me, drive on that country road again. I made it home safe, but was shaken, and to cut a long story short, my family thought I was just being hysterical and had just seen a deer, but I know what I saw, and this thing wasn't a deer. It couldn't have been. I've read up on skinwalkers, but I'm not sure if it's what I saw. I mean, do they even exist out in the Midwest? I thought that was more in Arizona or New Mexico. Why would a skinwalker be here? Why would it come after me? Was it even a skinwalker, or was it something else entirely? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? What was that thing? Please, if anyone knows what it was, or has any idea of it, please tell me. I'm so scared I'm going to come across that thing again, and I don't know if next time I'll be as lucky. This is 100% true, so this will probably be a boring account compared to some of the other posts here, but I wanted to share this memory somewhere, and maybe get opinions on the matter. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My mom would often take us camping in the summers. This particular camping trip was somewhere in the vicinity of Shiprock, New Mexico. My mother took my older brother Chris, 10, and myself, 8, camping often in those days, and preferred dispersed camping on BLM/NPS land to camping in merged grounds. She usually find us a spot and make herself busy setting up the tents and pit, while Chris and I would scamper around and explore the area and be generally unhelpful. On this particular trip, we arrived in the middle of the day, and as my mom started setting up camp, Chris and I started to explore the area around our campsite. We wandered into the woods of our campsite. Being in the desert, it was really just stunted trees and sagebrush, so I hesitate to describe it as a forest. But the trees and brush were taller than me, and provided a decent screen. I wandered down into a gully and came face to face with what I described to my mother as a wolf kangaroo. It was crouched low, with long, slender arms reaching down to the ground, and large, pointed ears like a deer. The fur covering its body was sandy brown and patchy, as if it had mange. It had large, orange eyes and a snout like a wolf or a coyote. It bared its teeth at me and stood up. At its full height, it was the biggest animal I had ever seen, towering over us and the sagebrush. I had never been, and probably still have never been, as frightened as I was then. Chris and I started screaming for our mom to come to our rescue. Chris regained his senses before me, taking off running back up the embankment to the campsite. The wolf kangaroo turned and speed skated away from us through the brush and tree. Its legs were backwards, like a dog's, and its strides took it far away and fast, faster than any deer or antelope I'd ever seen. After a split second of staring at it in horror, I followed my brother up the embankment, screaming for my mom. We were so frightened that my mom packed us back into the car and moved camps, conceding for once to stay in the managed campground. Chris and I were too scared to sleep in our tent that night, and we clung to Mom at the smallest twig snapping in the brush. So that's my story. It's boring compared to some of the others here, but it's 100% true, and I wanted to share. I vividly remember the way this animal moved as it glided away from us into the desert, and the sheer, utter horror I felt looking into its face. Chris and I have never managed to find an explanation for what we saw that day in the brush. I used to work at a local coal mining company on the Navajo Reservation as an operator for a coal haulage crew. I drove haulage equipment, and it was one of those Crest 240-ton coal haul belly dump trucks. If you've ever seen those trucks, they're pretty huge. They're about 2 to 3 stories high, and about 1/3 the length of a football field. I remember that I was working the night shift, which started around 11 p.m. Before we started the shift, we were required to do a pre-start inspection of our equipment. I walked around my truck, and when I went up to the rear of the truck and lowered its stairs, that gave me access to the engine bay. I walked up the stairs and started my inspection. I found a pretty bad coolant leak on the truck. I climbed back down and went to the cab and called my haulage supervisor. He answered and asked me if I can drive the truck to the main shop for repairs. So I left the ready line and drove 6 to 8 miles back to the shop, and I called the shop maintenance supervisor, and he instructed me to drive around back of the shop and park the truck there. I drove around the shop, parked the truck, and I wanted to see how much coolant I had left. I climbed back down from the cab, walked around to the back side of the truck, and lowered the stairs. I checked the coolant level, and I had a significant loss of coolant. I called my supervisor over the radio and asked him to pick me up. As I started to walk away from the truck towards the shop, I seen it. It was big, like a bull. It walked weird, patches of tan fur missing, blotches of blackened skin, and its head was big. The head was as large as a pumpkin, and it wobbled around like it was unbalanced. It had an unnatural look, nothing like I'd ever seen. This thing walked on all fours and about 4 to 5 feet tall. It was about 100 feet away and was walking toward me. My first instinct was that it was a sick dog, mange infested, and malnourished. It continued to walk toward me, and I thought this sucker might be sick and have rabies. I took out my flashlight and shined the light at it, yelling at it to stay away. It continued to walk towards me. It was then that I noticed it wasn't alive. Its eyes did not give off any reflection and were black and solid. It was unnatural. I reached for my pocket knife and yelled at it to stop. It stopped when it was about 20 feet away. I was still walking towards the shop, and it paralleled me all the way there. I never looked away. I thought it could attack me. By the time I got to the shop door entrance, it started walking towards the east. I went inside and got the shop supervisor, and we both came out. It wasn't about a minute later, and it was gone. We walked to the east, and my supervisor drove up. Now, there was only one way into the back side of the shop, and my supervisor should have seen it. He didn't. I explained to him what I saw, and he said he didn't see it on the way into the shop. My supervisor said that I saw a skinwalker, and that it usually was seen walking around the shop. The rest of the shift, I stayed with my supervisor. I think he was scared. I wasn't scared, nor did I go into shock like some people describe. It was an experience that I would never forget. To this day, I don't know what I witnessed those few days, nor do I want to know. I think it would be better that way. To set the scene with some background information, I'm a 20-year-old Latino woman. I'm a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, and have spent a year in Afghanistan back in 2015. During the time of this experience, my girlfriend and I took a camping trip, and for the sake of this story, I will call her Olivia. I've grown up in a very wooded area of Florida. Many trees and animals of all sorts. Alligators, bears, panthers, coyotes, and sometimes wolves from people owning them and letting them into the wild when they got big. The area we had gone to was new terrain for us. She insisted we go somewhere new and explore around, since I would have to return to California to my duty station in a few days. She wanted to explore the new terrain with me. We walk along the beaten path, admiring nature in the wooded areas, flowers, and even small animals and birds that inhabited the area. Olivia went to college for zoology, so she enjoyed teaching me about the different animals and the ways to identify them by their tracks and other signs. As we were walking to the camp clearing in this particular forest, we came across a hardly visible pathway, winding deeper into the brush. Her nature calling was pulling her into it. She wanted to explore and find a place inside to set up camp. But call it military intuition, but I felt really uneasy with the idea. Reluctantly, with her pleading, I agreed. We then began to trek through the brush, thorny vines cutting up my legs through my jeans, and a spider web hitting me in the face every now and again, due to the overlaying branches. We walked for roughly 45 minutes until we came into a clearing, deciding this was the best spot we could set up camp. Olivia pitched our tents as I got the fire roaring, and at this point, the dusk is creeping in on us. We lay down to settle in for the night, and all is well. That is, until I'm awakened by things being thrown by the side of my tent. It takes me a little bit for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The campfire was now a dim glow. My eyes finally adjust as I look around. I wasn't truly awake until the smell hit me like a semi-truck. The smell of rotting garbage. It was sickening. As I tried to gain my composure, that's when I saw the figure. It was tall, very large and stocky, and appeared very human-like, just too large to be a person. There was still tapping against the tent, some large, others small, but I didn't make a peep. My voice was lodged in my throat, and I'm not even sure at this point I was breathing. All the hair on my body was on end. I was terrified. Olivia shifted in her sleep, opening her eyes. "Hey, is everything okay?" I cut her off by placing my hand over her mouth, raising a finger to my lips in order to tell her to be quiet. That's when I heard it. The growling. It was low, more like a grumble and a groan than a growl, but it was a sound like no other. It was enough to make even my drill sergeants piss themselves. Our eyes directed to the zipper, and it began to move. It slowly started unzipping. Whatever this thing was, it was getting into our tent. I reached next to me and grabbed a small handgun I took everywhere with me, and took aim. A rather loud bang is heard as I took my shot, making a direct hit into the thing's shoulder. A monstrous growl scream is heard. It rattled me to the bone, and Olivia only cried out of pure fear. We watched as this figure disappeared, and we didn't fall asleep just in case it returned. I stayed with her all night, my handgun at my side. The next morning, we were packing all of our stuff and getting ready to head out when we saw it. A stocky figure standing in the tree line. It was around 8, maybe 9 feet tall. It was large, hairy, and seemed rather human-like, besides its dark, deep eyes and fur-covered body. It just watched us as we collected our things. We never broke eye contact either. The thing just watched before sinking back into the woods. We've never ran so fast in our lives back to the main road. Olivia still has nightmares about this thing that terrorized us by throwing things and opening our tent. And I'll admit, the thing really creeped me out. Let me just tell you, I haven't been camping since. During the summer of 2016, my larger group of friends and I went camping out at this spot called Desert Creek. It's a place that's about 100 miles from any town, deep in some mountains in Nevada. I'm not of any sort of native descent, but I've heard a few Skinwalker stories before. I didn't believe them too much until this night. My large group drove out to the camp spot and got set up. Being stupid teenagers, we started drinking. It was 4th of July weekend, so the camp spots were sort of busy, but all of the spots were pretty far apart, so we didn't think we would have too many problems. The drinking started around 2 in the afternoon, right after we set up camp. While setting up my tent, I noticed some odd footprints, but didn't think too much of it. By the time night fell, all of us were pretty drunk. I decided I had to go take a leak, so I walked over to a tree. But before I could, I saw what looked like a coyote, but something was off about it. It turned and looked at me and stood up on 2 feet, and it sounded like it was trying to say something to me, but it couldn't get out the words. They were just sounds for a few seconds. I was paralyzed with fear, and then it seemed like the words started to become more clear, but it's still not right. I heard my best friend, let's call him C. C's voice came from its mouth. "Hey, hand me another beer." That's when I snapped out of it. I turned and ran back to camp and told everyone, but no one believed me, and I wasn't sure if I believed myself. But after, I became really paranoid. I thought I could hear sounds all night. When it was time to go to bed, I had almost forgotten about it. Keep in mind, we were about 2 36 packs, in between about 8 of us. I was lying in my tent listening to the crackling of the fire when all of a sudden I could hear footsteps, but they were scattered. I looked out the window of the tent and saw a humanoid figure about 10 feet away standing next to the fire staring at me. Then it said again in C's voice, "Hey guys, I think I'm gonna go to bed." That's when I heard C say from his tent, "What was that?" He poked his head out of the tent and screamed. Everybody got up at that point, and that's when this thing turned and lunged at my other friend. Let's call him Jay. Jay jumped out of the way and hopped into his car, which was right next to his tent. The thing then howled this terrifying sound, and that's when I realized the smell of rotten eggs and burning garbage. The thing ran away and C said, "Guys, we need to get out of here." We all hopped into our cars and started driving out. When one of my friends in front of me stopped about a mile from the main road, I got out with the pistol my dad had let me borrow for protection, and I realized my friend's truck had a flat tire. We all heard the howl again, and it sounded like it was in the middle of the canyon where we were in, about a 25-minute drive away from us. We thought we would be okay, so we got to work putting the spare tire on. We had only just gotten the flat tire off and we started to smell the rancid odor again. We stopped and looked around and heard the howl once again, this time right next to us. We bolted to our cars and tried to drive away when this thing jumped out in front of the car and stood up. The creature looked into my eyes and spoke once more, but in a demonic-like voice. "Gonna have to try harder than that." I slammed on the gas and this thing jumped over my car. We got out of there and drove 150 miles back home, still drunk and way past curfew, but we didn't care. The next morning, I drove my friend back to his truck, and when we both got there, we were both struck with this terrible feeling in our stomachs. His truck's windows were broken, and scratched into the car all over the place was every single one of our full names. There were 2 animals in the bed of the truck, but we couldn't tell what kind of animals they were because they were so mangled. From that point on, we had never given a thought to going camping at Desert Creek ever again. I will not say my name for this story, as I am afraid they will find me, but you can call me Rose. I was 14 when it happened, so about a year ago. I was at a powwow with my friends, a young girl, let's call her Lily, and her older sister, Saria. It was getting late, probably around 10 p.m., when we came up with the idea to tell scary stories. I've always been fascinated by Skinwalker stories, though I have never seen one myself. Well, that was about to change. I came up with a story and told my friends, then Lily, then Saria. After telling stories, we finally got tired and went to bed. Saria and Lily slept in a small tent while I slept in a camper with my dad. I've been up where the powwow is many times, and we call the area the grounds. I'm not really a native. I have a little Blackfoot, but I'm mostly Irish. The grounds are full of mostly Cherokee. Anyway, I came up with a stupid idea to scare my friends. I went outside next to their tent and snapped a twig. Then I made loud footsteps along with hard breathing and groaning noises. I could see their shadows sit up, so I knew they were awake. I was just about to shake the tent when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew there were bears and big cats in the woods, but they rarely come in the grounds because all of the lights and people. I didn't want to take any chances, so I slowly walked towards my camper. Then I hear the same groaning noises I made behind me. I thought it was Lily or Saria trying to get me back, but something wasn't right. It sounded just like my voice. Haha, very funny guys. I call back to their tent. Haha, very funny guys, said someone who sounded just like me in the woods. Then I see Lily and Saria walk out of their tent. Will you stop? We're trying to sleep, said Saria in an annoyed voice. A branch breaks and echoes in the woods. Saria and Lily look behind them to see nothing. I think a bear is out there. Hurry, come inside my camper, I whisper to them. They both walk towards me, when suddenly a loud, curdling scream filled my ears. It sounded like a girl and a dog screaming in the woods. Loud footsteps came closer to us. We ran as fast as we could to my camper and slammed the door shut. I looked out the window and see a dark shadow next to my friend's tent. Then I did something I still regret to this day. I got a flashlight and shined it at the figure. It had the head of a bear and the upper body of a human and the legs of some kind of dog. It stood on its hind legs and stared at us with glowing eyes. I screamed so loud I probably woke everyone up from a mile away. My dad came running. What's wrong? Are you okay? I yelled, Skinwalker. I saw a Skinwalker. My dad got out his shotgun while his friend, who was staying the night, let's call him Jack, grabbed a bowl of sage. My dad ran out the door to see nothing. Jack lit the sage and put it in the bowl outside the front door. We stayed inside the rest of the night. The next morning, we went out to investigate the area where the Skinwalker was. All of us almost puked from the rotten smell of animals. I went home the next day. You would think the story ends there, but sadly no, there's more. I was laying in bed trying to sleep when I heard footsteps outside my window. I looked at my window to see a face of a bear. It followed me home. I screamed, but I was home alone because my mom was still at work. The Skinwalker banged at my window, cracking it. I tried to let out another scream, but what came out was a loud growl. The creature froze. I did something I thought I would never do. I ran to the window and yelled, "Go away! Be gone!" at the creature. Slowly, it backed away into the woods. I stayed up all night waiting for it to come back, but it never did. Why did it follow me home? And why did I do what I did? I probably will never know, but all I care about is it's never coming back. I'm 15 now, and still no sight of the monster. Hopefully, I will never see something like that again. My name is Jonathan. I'm 22. I've encountered this creature twice, so I'm covering the first time I saw the thing, which was when I was 14 and lived with my parents. My grandparents told me stories of skinwalkers, and they took them quite literally, which is how I knew what this thing was. One night, I was getting ready to go to bed, and my cat was in my window. As I went to get into bed, he started growling. I didn't really think much of it, just thought maybe he saw a deer or a strayed cat or dog. He kept going and started hissing. Then my curiosity got the best of me and I looked out the window. I froze. I hadn't looked directly at it. I had just looked at my yard and its glowing red eyes caught the corner of my eye. I knew exactly what it was. I tried to move, but I just couldn't as it just stared at me and my cat, still hissing and growling. A couple of seconds went by and it let out a curdling scream, so loud it might as well have been right in front of me. I broke the gaze and closed the curtains, grabbing my cat and getting away from the window. Then, not a couple seconds later, I heard a tapping at my window. I knew they were really fast, so I wasn't surprised that it got to my window so quickly. My gut had sank at this point, and I couldn't move. My cat was silent but on edge, and all of its hair was standing up. Then it tried to speak. There's no explanation on how it did this, but that it's been around for a very long time. It said, "Jonathan, come here. I need your help." The most frightening part about that was it was in my dad's voice, but he had been gone for over a year now. The tapping continued for about 10 minutes and stopped completely. Longest 10 minutes of my life. After it stopped, I heard footsteps stomp off quickly into the woods where I lived. I didn't get any sleep that night, and the next morning everyone was up and didn't seem like they had heard anything, and acted like everything was normal. I haven't told anyone, and you're the only person I've told this. I couldn't tell if it was a Skinwalker or a Wendigo, as I didn't see any of its features except that it had glowing red eyes, and that it mimicked my dad. I was 15 when this happened. I have some family in Arizona, so I decided to go out there for the summer. I was very bold and stupid. My grandmother used to say, "You're like a young wolf cub, always trying to figure out your fangs. That can lead to trouble." I didn't understand at the time what she meant by that. My uncle, let's call him Tom, told my cousins and I when I arrived not to go out at night. I thought to myself, why not? Sure, the place is colder at night, but I'm 15, almost a man. So I waited until he, his wife, and children went to sleep that night. I snuck out of the house quietly. I was wandering around, looking at everything, houses, stores, etc. I had walked 2 to 3 miles away from the house when I realized that I needed to take a leak somewhere away from the streetlights. I found a house with no one living in it not too far from the road. I stepped off the street, going around the right side of the house. I was in the middle of doing my business and I thought I heard a cry from a little girl, but it sounded somewhat off, like if it was coming from a tunnel or something far off in the distance. I listened closer for a while before stepping in that direction I thought it may have come from. I yelled, "Hey, little girl, where are you?" Then the crying just stopped. I was confused. What was going on? That's when I heard it. My own voice, but not quite right. More like a growl reply. "I'm scared. Can you come to the other side and help me get home?" The home was almost a dog's growl. My mind was racing now that I was fully creeped out, and I felt an overpowering need to run. As I turned to do just that, I heard movement from somewhere behind me. At the same time, I started smelling something like rotten meat. Looking back, I saw it. I think it was trying to look human, but the way it moved, like a movie zombie, all stiff. Though once it saw me, it started moving much smoother. Plus, its eyes were wrong. They look like dog eyes when light hits them at night. As it moved closer, the thing tried to mimic my Uncle Tom's voice. I just ran from it, but as messed up as its walk was, the thing was fast. I ran full speed, but the thing was catching up fast. The thing passed me, then turned into the middle of the road. I saw something about it, now that it was in the streetlight. Not only was its eyes dog-like, but the face was no longer human, but looked like a coyote now. My instincts told me to run the other way. I was frozen, and before my eyes, the rest of the body snapped and popped as it was transforming into the coyote on all fours. I ran in the direction of my uncle's house. I heard it coming for me as I ran. This is where something weird happened. As it got close this time, my mind went blank. I don't know how to explain this, but I'll do my best. I saw a gray wolf in my mind's eye, and I turned realizing a growl from my mouth that even sounded like a wolf's growl. The thing stopped, clocked its head to the side, and just stared at me. The thing looked like a coyote, but it was standing on its hind legs. I started walking backwards, seeing the gray wolf, and knowing I was using my instincts at the moment, that if I turned to run, it would cease to chase me down and get me. I kept my eyes on it until I was almost to my uncle's door, where I regained control of my mind. Going into the house, I heard scratching on the door, asking in different voices to be let in for an hour. Then it left. It did come back the next night to my uncle's house, but Tom knew what it was after. Looking at it through the window of the front door, it pretended to be human again, but tried to use my voice to get Tom to open the door. He went straight to work, burning sage and other herbs. Afterwards, asking me if I was the only one it was after. I told him everything. He was mad, telling me, "You're safe for the night, but I'm sending you home in the morning." I know he was mad, but I needed to know what this was. He told me it was a skinwalker, and it was going to hunt me until it loses my scent. He told me about the legend of them, but the wolf thing, he smiled and said that, "You'll have to figure that one out for yourself." The next day, I was picked up by my mom. I am afraid to go back that way. I don't walk at night anymore, and I still have no answer about the wolf thing that stopped through my mind that night. I was heading to a small town in southern Utah with my wife and a couple of friends. We were on our way to see Lee, a friend of mine that hadn't been seen for a long time. We met up with him at his place and decided to hang out at a nearby lake. It was a typical quiet campsite with a fire pit and a couple of logs around it. We had a little picnic there and we were exchanging stories and catching up with each other all day. Eventually, one of my friends, Bryce, got tired and decided to fall asleep in the car while the rest of us continued talking. At this point, twilight had fallen. Erica and I were discussing something while my wife and Lee were talking about something else. All of a sudden, my wife and Lee fall silent. Erica and I quickly notice. We look at them and Lee says, "Get in the car." I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he says, "There might be a skinwalker around." Now, Erica and I had no idea what a skinwalker was at the time, so we asked him to explain. After his explanation of what it was, Erica and I, being the only sensible thinkers at the moment, and Bryce, just barely waking up from us jumping in the car, decide we should investigate, believing that it was probably just some kids in a nearby campsite trying to mess with us. We came to the top of the hill that was between our campsite and looked for any likely candidates for the scare. None. All we could see was a couple of trees and some bushes. We even called out and there was no response. As we were walking back to the campsite, we heard it. A rustling in the bushes behind us. We look again but see nothing. At this point, we were considering that Lee and my wife may be right. We get back and it's getting dark fast, so I ask them, "Is there something we can do to keep them away for a little bit?" "Yes," said Lee. "They don't like fire." And Tim, my wife, and Bryce start working on the fire, while me and Erica go down by the lake to collect the 2 liters we had put there in the water to keep cold. Now it's dark and Erica and I headed back with the sodas. We hear rustling in the bushes beside us. We're both scared. We hurry back and start putting everything back in the car as soon as possible, while Lee made sure the fire kept burning. After getting everything into the car, I rush over to the fire pit and tell everyone to get in the car as I proceeded to stomp the fire out. Right as the fire went out, I hear a curdling scream across the lake. I felt my heart stop. Lee had said skinwalkers are fast and could make up a full lap around the lake in a matter of seconds. I jump in the car and yell, "Go!" Right as the engine started and the lights come on, we see it. Coming out of the bushes right in front of us, glowing yellow eyes and what looked like a zombified coyote with decaying flesh. A skinwalker. We backed up and peeled out of there as fast as we could. This happened 2 years ago and it still scares me to how close of a call it was. I am honestly amazed that we all survived such a close encounter with this skinwalker. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like our house now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the feast and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow, I was able to get a few hours of sleep. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, except for my brother snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first and I waited for him outside. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went silent again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me, and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon. 2 burning yellow eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk towards me with long strides, until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was dark red. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash and smelt like rotten flesh in the summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began to move toward my brother. Finally noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew. Reaching its arm out toward my brother's head, something finally snapped in me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more angrier at the thing, that it was trying to hurt us. It kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make a primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning, my family returned home from the feast. After relaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. I'm half Navajo and half Mexican. For over 20 years of my life, I've lived on the Navajo Nation reservation in New Mexico. My Native American side of the family always warned us to be careful at night. My grandparents would always tell me stories of these shape-shifting witches who can curse you or mess with you. They called them Skinwalkers, because they would take the skin of animals and wear them to change into that animal, or something in between a human and an animal. I never believed in it really. I'm only half Navajo and light-skinned, so I was never treated the same by most people here, so I drifted away from the culture and thought it wasn't for me. It was around summertime. This happened when I was in high school, so about 6 to 8 years ago. I would have been like 15 to 17 then. I used to hang out with a group of guys who liked to do a lot of delinquent type stuff. You know, smoke cigs and stay up all night playing video games at someone's house. Then at 3 a.m., if we felt like it, we would go sneak out to Paradise. I know, it's an ironic name. It's basically a giant metal pipe that carries irrigation water to all the farms. But really, it was also a spot for kids to get drunk or high in the evenings. However, the place did have a scary history of kids and adults who drowned in the night. But I always thought those were urban legends. But at 3 a.m., that was our time. We as boys would test one another across the pipe, sort of an initiation, to see how far you could go. We usually could go all the way across. Now keep in mind, this pipe goes well over 3 stories high. It's also wide. I'd say as wide as an average car. We would walk this thing for kicks in a group of 9 at 3 a.m. So one night, me and a small group of friends were driving around bored at 2 a.m., wanting to spook each other. So I said let's go to Paradise and walk the pipe. As to most of these friends I was hanging out with had never done it. They agreed, pumped up on energy drinks, and we drove. It was pretty quiet. The sky was dark and the night was cold. The boys with me were Michael, Cody, Tommy, and Theral. Now, Theral was the driver because he had a car and his family was pretty well off too, so he never had to worry about cash. We got to the place and he didn't want to go, said his parents were traditional, and he wanted to just chill in the car. Basically, he wanted to text some chick, I'm sure, without us bugging him. I told him it's fine, keep the car locked and running in case we see something scary. Me and the other boys went on without him. As we got onto the lead pipe, a few of the guys were scared and had me take the lead. As we crawled, I'd say 1/4 of the way on the pipe, talking and laughing, I noticed a faint white or light gray bat bigger than my head flying around us. It dived for us a few times. We dodged it. But then Tommy slipped because of the shoes he was wearing and almost fell off the pipe. I reached out, grabbing him on his right arm. Michael had grabbed my shirt collar, and Cody grabbed his. Altogether, we got back on the pipe, shaken that we almost lost Tommy to the dark depths below. The bat was gone. We were all freaking out, but the guys wanted to continue. We laughed about it as guys usually do. We passed the halfway point on the pipe with no problems. But as we got 3/4 of the way, Michael saw something. You see, at the end of the pipe there's a hill. Behind that hill, it's very brightly lit because of a church somewhere off in the distance. Anyway, on that hill was a black figure of pointy ears, a dog's silhouette. Now, Michael was a tough guy. He yelled at that thing, "I'm not scared of you, Skinwalker," and tossed a few rocks he had in his pocket. One rock hit the pipe and the other fell into the brush below. That shadow silhouette dog stood up on its two legs like a person. We all freaked out, jaws dropped. Then Cody said, "Look, another one to the left." Tommy said there's another one on the right. So there's 3 silhouettes of pointy dog-eared people on the hill. I told them to back up so we could get back to the car. The things to the right and the left of the hill started to move down the hill towards us. Now there's just one standing on the hill, the one who stood up first. Now we're trying to go back, but we're still halfway. Under us, complete darkness. It's quiet for a few minutes. Then we heard a girl crying. Sounded like she was hurt and scared. We were overcome with a strange feeling of wanting to help. Michael wanted to go back towards the end and crawl down the pipe to help this girl. I almost followed too, but inside I said, "No, this is wrong. Something isn't right." So I yelled at him and everyone, saying, "Are you stupid? Look at the thing up there on the hill. Did you not see those things? It's a trap. Let's leave that fake crying. If that girl is hurt, we'll come back when the sun is up in 2 hours." Now, the moment I said this, the crying stopped. All the guys freaked out, saying they can't believe what came over them. They said they almost forgot what we saw before. Halfway on the pipe now, we hear a drum being played. We start running. Running on this pipe, almost to the car, Corey stops us. We can all hear it, and it sounds like a pack of snarling, growling, yelping coyotes. But it's pitch dark below. But we know they are under us. We run, full speed. Not looking back in the car, we yell and drive as fast as we can back onto the dirt road to a well-lit gas station, and explained what happened to Theryl. We couldn't get the girls crying out of our heads, and we went back in daylight just to make sure. We did not find the girl. Instead, in the area, we heard the crying and we saw a coyote watching us a close distance away. It was not shy. It looked at us for 4 seconds and walked into the brush. I did not go back there after that. This was about a year ago. I lived in Michigan. My older brother was planning a big cruise to Mexico and then invited me to go along. I agreed because I'd never left the country before, and I thought it would be a fun trip. So it was a day before the flight, and I went over to my cousin's to sleep because our flight was very early and I live 40 minutes away. My cousin's backyard is completely woods with a small creek, and it's beautiful down there in the summertime. But it was about March when this happened, so the woods were very bare. It was getting late, and we were all starting to go to bed. I slept in the living room while my cousin went upstairs to bed with her husband and said goodnight. I was up, just facing the window to the woods, because it always takes me a little bit to fall asleep. Then, very faintly, I saw a pair of glowing eyes off in the distance. My mind raced as I told myself it was just a deer, but the glowing eyes were getting closer and closer. Then I realized it wasn't a deer. The thing had to be at least 9 or 10 feet. I was horrified and paralyzed with fear. It looked like a big wolf or deer that had been decaying. The thing went back into the woods. That night I didn't sleep. When it was about 4, I heard my cousin's husband walking down the steps, and I told him about the whole thing that had happened that night. His eyes got very wide and said very quietly, "You seen a skinwalker." I've done some more research about these things, and I do believe I've seen a skinwalker. I never told anyone the story because I felt like I would be called a liar, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. To start, I'm a white female. I was adopted 7 years ago by my Navajo family, and we've always been close despite my obvious cultural differences. Still, I learned about skinwalkers firsthand, and they've since then become an accepted part of my life. I left Utah at the end of 2012. The first story happened to my adopted uncle. He was driving through the canyon area. They live in Blanding, Utah, a spot not quite notorious for skinwalkers, but full of them nonetheless. It was dark outside, but the moon illuminated the canyon and brush, enough for him to see out of his side vision that something was running across the desert night. He was in his 40s, and at the time, he was a police officer, so a full-grown man. He started singing and praying in Navajo and kept his eyes on the road in front of him, but he was driving at least 55 to 60 miles per hour. So the shape running through the desert was keeping pace with him, despite his high speed. He said that it looked very vaguely human-shaped, but paler than any human that he'd ever seen. Still, he didn't look directly at it, and despite his singing, he was getting more and more scared. One thing my Navajo family always taught me was that these creatures feed on our fear. This one certainly seemed to. My uncle was shaking and sweating when this running thing picked up speed, outpacing his truck, and then it was maybe 30 yards ahead of him. It made a sharp right and began to run towards the road. He knew it was going to directly intersect him, and he made up his mind to put the foot on the gas. So it got closer and he sped up, and just as the two crossed paths, it jumped onto the road. He saw it for the first time then. He described it as a skinny man in jeans, with a plaid shirt, typical reservation wear, with a long face and big yellow eyes that looked like cat eyes. Its arms were thrown up over its head, and its hands were kind of flying behind it. The worst part was its mouth was open and seemed disconnected from its jaw. The chin was just flapping around, about a foot below its nose. It leapt onto the road and just as quickly jumped out of the way of the truck, and he didn't see it again. He prayed the whole way home, and they had a ceremony shortly after that. Another encounter happened to my adopted brother, who was one of the most level-headed and unshakable men I have ever met. He was 30 when this happened. He was at their dad's house, partaking in one of these ceremonies, which happens in a hogan. The rule is that you never leave the hogan alone, because the magic and energy that you make in one of those ceremonies is kind of like a supernatural light beacon. You never know what kind of creatures you're attracting. Still, Eric, my brother, was a pretty rational guy and wasn't afraid of the dark. He's been in the hogan for hours, chanting and praying and all that good stuff. He needed a smoke break and to take a leak, so against the general rule, he edged out of the roundhouse and out into the night. There was nothing around except 15 or 20 parked cars, all close to the ceremony area. It was a large gathering, so Eric did his business with no incident and lit up a cigarette. He was standing there, staring off into space, when he got that feeling of being watched. To shake it off, he walked away from the hogan about 20 feet and scanned the desert. Everything was quiet, except drums coming from the back of the tent and singing within. Just as he was about to shrug off his weird feeling and chuck his cigarette butt, he saw it. Under one of the vehicles, a dark shape with two shining eyes. The eyes were animal-like. They didn't glow on their own, but had reflective light in them, and they glinted right at Eric. They were yellow. The creature didn't have the shape of any animal he'd recognized, though. He explained it to me that it was shaped like Gollum, really skinny with a round human head. Eric walked towards the vehicle and bent down to get a closer look. Dust scrabbled around and he could hear a skittering noise. One bony arm shoved gravel his way, and the next thing he knew, the creature was gone and the vehicle was empty. But then he smelled this disgusting, puke-worthy stench. And he got scared then, because that's one of the worst things in Navajo culture. Bad smells are treated very seriously when they're assumed to be supernatural. So he straightened back up, and then he realized the source of the smell. A shadow fell over him, covering him from behind. He is around 6'2", so this thing, he said it was at least 7.5 feet. He was shivering and didn't move as it approached him from behind. Until it was standing inches away. He could feel it. He could smell it. See its shadow. And then the worst thing. He felt it breathe on his neck. Eric said that it sounded like a horse or a cow when it snorts. And its breath was warm. When he looked at his feet, he saw his shoes. And behind his right foot, a big hoof. So he closed his eyes and started to sing. And right in that moment, his dad and uncle got a terrible feeling from inside the hogan. They bolted up and exited, calling his name. They found him shivering outside, too terrified to talk, and too terrified to stop singing in Navajo. It took Eric months before he shared this with us, and he did so expecting us to laugh or call him crazy. But I completely believe his story. This just happened mere seconds ago. I'm a 22-year-old female, of sound mind, pretty but not immaculate, average size, living in Oklahoma. I have a job and have never had anything that could be considered a mental episode. I live in Tulsa, the second largest city in the state. To give a little backstory, I live in a house with 4 roommates, all men. I think of them as brothers, and we never really worry about anything like intruders, and always have our 3 back doors unlocked. Now, to give you a visual aid, I live in the front part of the house, the living area, and 2 of the doors are the back doors to my roommates' rooms. The back doors lead out to a porch that overlooks our backyard. The backyard is large, though it's a pretty urban area. It snowed a few days ago, and there's still some snow on the ground, and it's freezing. But there's no smoking in the house. I put on my jacket and throw on some slippers. I grumble to my roommates about having to go outside to smoke alone, but trudge out our back doors anyways. I usually bring my phone or another person's, but this time I didn't. I've been bringing people because I've been hearing strange noises. I'm not the only one either. My other roommates have heard them as well. Sounds that resonate in our backyard, but seem to have no place. They sort of sound like chimes. The fence surrounding our yard is wood until about halfway up, and then the chain links start. So it's about 12:30 a.m. and I'm on the porch smoking when something catches my eye. Now, I have 2 cats in my house, my boy cat and my roommate's female cat. There's a cat that wanders around and tries to sneak in from time to time. And I notice this thing that caught my eye is close to the ground and wiggling. I assume it's the cat and start looking around for something to shoo it away. Finding nothing, I resort to building a snowball, and I throw it. A small one, nothing too big. I don't want to hurt it. I just want it to go on. So I throw the snowball and it hits it. It was then that I realized how big this thing was. As soon as the ball hit it, my entire body filled with an outstanding fear, one that I cannot explain. I was frozen. I watched this thing slowly stand up from the crouch that it was in. It looked like a man, but gross. Its knees was bent in the wrong way, and it had gross, sagging skin. It was unbelievably tall. Its arms were like twice as long as a person's. Its face was distorted, crinkled with the same wrinkles that creases its body. It looked at me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. With an inhuman speed, it took off towards the back of my yard, and it was gone. My feet started moving again, and cigarette still in hand. I crashed through the doors into my house. I screamed at my roommates to lock the doors and tried to calm my trembling. I can't get the image of this thing out of my mind. I can't calm myself. They keep telling me that I'm tripping, and that can't be real. But it's Christmas, I'm not on any drugs, and I know what I saw. I'm terrified. What do I do? What did I see? Update. 1:43 a.m. I force my roommate to go outside with me, and there are prints in the snow. While I can't confirm that they are the creatures, they appear too large to be that of Tyler's or my own. My cats won't go anywhere near any of the doors. And when we were outside, we heard what sounded like a cat, but it's weird. It had an almost garbled undertone. The leaves were moving as well. I'm terrified. Update. Last night was the toughest night I've had in a long time. None of my roommates believe me, except for the one that's also seen a Skinwalker. All night long there was this very strange tapping and scratching coming from the attic. I couldn't get more than 45 minutes of sleep at a time. While trading stories around a campfire, my friend recalled an encounter he had while serving an LDS mission. My friend's mission region had a reservation within its boundaries. However, it was relatively far from where he was serving. On occasion, him and his mission companion were asked to travel further than usual, to meet with some investigators. This took them near the reservation. On their way home, their car ran out of gas, and it wasn't until late that night that they were able to continue the journey home. My friend, who was driving while his companion slept in the passenger seat, chose a different route that took him through the back roads in an attempt to get home sooner. He told us he was driving above the speed limit when he noticed movement in the woods lining the road. Because coyotes were common in the area, he took little notice at first. Then he looked out the window and slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop jolted his companion awake, who immediately wanted to know what was wrong. My friend was shaken, and he said he would tell him once they got home. He asked him to say a prayer. By the time they made it home, his companion was eager to know what happened. My friend told him, "I looked down the road next to the car and saw 6 men running on all fours, keeping up with the car. I was driving 40 miles an hour." I'm from southern Ohio. My particular neck of the woods was hilly and full of the Amish. I lived deep in the countryside with my father, who was stricken with frequent seizures and was unable to work or live alone. My story takes place early in the autumn of 2014. I was a 26-year-old college dropout at the time and working part-time at a gas station. Thanks to this, I had a lot of free time on my hands, most of which was spent hiking in the woods surrounding my home. On one of my many solo hikes, I saw something that changed me. As stated before, the seasons had just changed to autumn, and the trees were just starting to change into the many brilliant shades that time of year is known for. I had decided after one of my shifts at work to get one last extended hike in before the cold started to set in for the year. I had left the house around 2:30 p.m. and told my dad I'd be back around 7 p.m. for dinner. Warm sun but with a cooling breeze, remarkably low humidity, and not a cloud in the sky. Perfect weather for a hike. I had been walking alongside a creek using a large branch turned into a makeshift walking stick, my usual route, for around 45 minutes when I realized the woods were quiet. Too quiet. I stopped to listen, and aside from the running water to my right, there was not a sound in the forest. After shuddering from a chill I attributed to a breeze that had cut through the trees, I continued my trek, trying my best to match the silence of the woods with each step. Another 45 to 60 minutes passed, and my trail separated from the creek and began to loop back around towards my house. I had always dreaded this part of the hike due to the steep hills that laid before me, and stopped to take a breather. After resuming my hike, I had made it nearly 3/4 of the way through, when I felt a strong wind at my back, then a loud crack somewhere in front of me. About 40 yards ahead of me, and about 15 yards to the right of the trail, a young white-tailed buck stood alert, but unaware of my presence. After a few seconds of taking in the beauty of the creature, I noticed that the wind was still blowing, and thought it was strange that the buck hadn't noticed me. I had always heard that being upwind of a deer would ensure that you'd be noticed, and that the beast would flee. Shrugging it off, I continued walking, making sure to remain silent as to avoid spooking the buck. After walking about 15 yards, I noticed movement in the direction of the deer. Looking, I noticed he was no longer alert, and began walking slowly through the brush. But I noticed something else as well. The deer was now around 30 yards away from me, but in between us, close to the ground, there was a pitch-black mass moving under the cover of foliage. It was much closer to the buck and approaching him. He had yet to notice it. I froze, waiting to see what the strange creature was, as coyotes are the only common predator around here, and this was way too large and much too dark to be one of those. After the distance between the two forest dwellers shrunk to what couldn't have been more than 10 yards, the hidden beast stopped, and with it, the wind. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The deer suddenly looked in the direction at me and flinched, as if it was going to sprint away, but before it could take so much as a step, a large black cat lunged at it, and instantly took the deer to the ground. While shocked at the appearance of this foreign predator, I remembered that there have been stories and eyewitness reports going around for the past couple of years of a large black mountain lion roaming the hills in my county. I could no longer see the animal through the brush, but I didn't need to see to know what it looked like. Quietly, I continued along my path, wanting to avoid disturbing the feasting feline. As I walked along, I realized I was getting a clearer view of the cougar. It was bigger than I expected, having only seen them on television or in books, and the color was mesmerizing, a deeper black than anything I'd ever seen, almost as if it was pulling the light towards it, never to escape. I stopped to marvel at the cat, and as I did, it began eating. I felt bad for the deer, but it was the circle of life and all. What felt like minutes couldn't have been more than a few seconds, and I was hit with a horrid smell attributed to the deer. I noticed that the cougar wasn't black all over. Its face and hands were the typical color. Wait, hands? Why did it have hands where the paws should have been? I began to study the creature more. Features which just seconds before were that of a large cat were becoming more human-like before my eyes. What was once a black cougar or mountain lion is now a large, bulky man with long black hair and covered in black furs for clothing, eating the deer raw with only his hands. I couldn't help but let out a quiet gasp, but it wasn't quiet enough. The man stopped and didn't move for a few moments. I knew I had to get out of there, but didn't want him to be able to follow me home. He hadn't looked in my direction yet, and as he was beginning to stand, without thinking I launched the stick I had been using to aid my hike back down the path in the direction I came from. After hearing the crash, the man sunk back down and began creeping in that direction, becoming a cat yet again as he moved. Taking my eyes off of him as little as possible, as fast as I could without making a noise, I continued along the path. Once I felt like I was far enough away, I broke into a sprint and didn't stop until I was through my back door. I haven't seen the man or cat since, but I quickly convinced my dad to move to Cincinnati and haven't been back to those woods, so who knows if he's still around. I knew about the Wendigo, Skinwalkers, etc. before my encounter, but though it didn't cross my mind until a few months ago when I was retelling the story to my younger cousin at Halloween to scare him. The problem is my story doesn't match up to many Skinwalker stories I've heard. In nearly all others, the Skinwalker takes on the form of a dog or related animal, and my part of the country isn't exactly known for them. Anyone know what else it could have been if not a Skinwalker? A few years ago, 2012 or 13 I think, since I was still in high school then, I was at a party with some friends, and as the night goes on, maybe 11 or 12 at night, one of my friends and I go outside to have a cigarette. The second we get out there, there's just this completely awful, foul smell, just like vomit and decay all at once. Now this was in the middle of nowhere, so we just figured it was an old animal, and went on having a cigarette. Less than a minute later, we hear something moving in the dark, and sure enough, a deer comes hobbling into the very edge of the porch light. But then I noticed something. One of its front legs was messed up in some way. I'm talking like broken in multiple places messed up. So my friend and I are slightly put off by this, and finish up our cigarette and go inside. However, right as we start to do that, one of the two porch lights goes pop and then goes out. So now there's less light outside and the deer goes back into darkness. So, a bit giddy, we both do a fake scared squeal at each other and turn around and go inside. And that's when we heard it. That undeniable sound of nails on the concrete patio. We both slowly turn around and see this hunched over, rotten coyote doing this very slow, unnatural crawl toward us. We go from 0 to 600, paralyzed with fear, almost instantly, until another one of our friends playfully pulls us through the open door, telling us to get back to the party. To this day, I have not experienced anything like that, and it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced.